welcome to our webinar today on tax trends and solutions in the UCITS world. As you may know, the webinar today is part of a broader 2022 initiative webinar series on UCITS. There's more to come still this year, so stay tuned for any updates from our side and how we conclude the session in 2022. Before my colleague Farah and I dive in and walk you through the topics we have prepared for today's tax session, just from an administrative perspective, some introductory remarks. We would really like to make this to the extent possible, as it is a webinar and an interactive session. So your participation is very much welcomed. So in that sense, please use the Q&A section and send us your questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A part at the end of the webinar. And in order to address your questions to us, you can access the Q&A session by clicking the three dots button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And we will address as many questions as possible today live, and otherwise follow up accordingly via email afterwards. Should you experience any technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat function, and we have a dedicated team here readily available who will help you address and solve the technical issues. So I guess, Farah, enough with the introductory remarks. Let's dive right into what we have prepared for you today. Basically, the idea is to structure the webinar in three parts, right? So we have the first part basically focus on subscription tax and reduction for sustainable assets, and then Farah will present a topic which is in practice very important, as it also heavily influences the performance of funds. So the question on withholding tax reclaims for UCITS. And then we will have a third part which will focus on the on recent trends we are seeing for UCITS, or the fund business and in general, and we'll conclude with a Q&A, as we said at the end. So let's jump into it. So sustainable assets and reduced subscription tax. I think the following or this slide, the left-hand structure chart should be familiar to each of you. It's very abstract, but it basically shows a typical single fund investment structure, which should be no news to you. But to demonstrate here, when we speak about fund, it can be a standalone fund, but it can also be a dedicated sub-fund, because we all know from a subscription tax perspective, you calculate the subscription tax on the NAV of the fund or the respective sub-fund, as the case may be. So when we are using the term fund, it equally means obviously sub-fund. So what has been done by the legislator following the taxonomy regulation and with effect as of 1st of January 2021? Basically, the Luxembourg legislator has introduced kind of a cascade table in view of successive subscription tax reductions, depending on the sustainable net assets within your fund. Meaning that if you hold less than 5% of sustainable net assets within your fund, all remains basically the same. The usual general 5 basis point subscription tax rate will apply, subject to or provided that you do not or cannot apply other exemptions or reductions in that context. Only if at least 5% of your portfolio within the fund makes of sustainable net assets, then you have a reduction from 5 basis point basically to 4 basis points. If at least 20% of investments are made in sustainable net assets, then the reduction goes to 3 basis points. If you have in your portfolio sustainable net assets amounting to at least 35%, then the reduction goes to 2%, and only the maximum reduction of 1 basis point is available if you have 50% of sustainable net assets within your structure. Obviously, you can see there's a strong incentive to it to qualify in the respective categories to achieve a reduction in subscription tax. So now, how can we actually achieve the reduction, or what do we need to do to get the subscription tax reduction? And there in practice, what we call, there needs to be applied a 3-step approach. First step, you need to determine the reduced subscription tax rate. Only in a second step, you need to determine the taxable basis. And in the third step, there needs to be a specific filing process. And in that context, I think we all already know a bit that how the filing process for subscription tax is been handled in the standard way, but now with the sustainable assets, it kind of got a new tweak to it on how to file in that context. We will get into that in a minute. So step one, what needs to be done in view of determining the reduced subscription tax rate. So what we need to have, or what the fund needs to have, is a certified statement by an approved statutory auditor. And that certified statement will focus on the situation of the portfolio in your fund on the last day of the previous financial year. And that statement will basically contain the percentage of net sustainable assets as determined in the annual report. So you have the annual report on the one hand, and a separate certified statement which certifies the percentage of the net sustainable assets. And with that certified statement, you can go to step 2, because on the basis of the percentage in the certified statement, you can determine the reduced rate, as we had seen in the initial table, and you will apply that reduced rate on the sustainable asset as at the last day of each quarter. There we are back to the general thinking we have in how to determine subscription tax. You apply a rate as at the last day of the respective quarter. Whereas going back to step 1, that certified assessment will focus on the assets as at the end of the previous financial year. And with these 2 pieces of information together, we can go to step 3 and the filing process. So that certified statement we mentioned in step 1, and that's kind of new now, that needs to be submitted annually, so for all 4 quarters and forward-looking for the future to the tax authorities. And that is what I said, kind of different to the general filing of subscription tax, where you usually look backward. You will file for the previous quarter by the 20th day following that quarter. So for instance, you need to file by 20th of April for the first quarter. Now, the certified statement, that needs to be filed at the same time with the first subscription tax return following the finalization of the annual report, and will need to be packed together and filed together via MyGuichet in that regard. So I think that's what I wanted to say from a subscription tax perspective and sustainable assets investment policy, and what needs to be done in practice to follow that. I think now, Farah, I guess it's time for you to explain us a bit about withholding tax reclaims and how that is actually done in practice. What are the burdens in a European context? What are the rules? Just walk us through it.
Exactly, perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Philippe. So maybe first, before to go deeply on what is tax reclaim and what are the challenges of tax reclaim, let's take a step back and see what are the main impact for the actors of the financial industry. So with the global economic context, we see that actors are looking and having more pressure on their investment performance or margin. And they are looking for solutions to stay competitive, strategies to be more competitive on the market. And one strategy that has a direct impact on the investment performance is tax reclaim, because you can increase your investment performance by using the withholding tax applied on the income derived from the investment, so dividend or interest. And I'm sure that you have been filing and know clients that have been filing reclaims for several years now. So the first case law is for more than 10 years about reclaims. And when we are speaking about reclaim, it's always come to our mind, okay, you have a complex process, it's time consuming, you have a lot of papers to collect, it's a paper-driven process. Into with technology, I think that we can overcome those challenges and take the opportunities to turn them in opportunities for our client to increase their investment performance. And as I said before, you have probably clients and you have probably filed reclaim for several years. And you know that for getting a refund or withholding tax reclaims, you have several ways. As a matter of fact, you have 3 types of legislation. So the domestic legislation, well, you will be using the domestic provision of the national law to introduce a reclaims. So when you want to process this type of reclaims, you need to understand the local legislation or having a counterpart in those countries to identify if you have an opportunities. So you will look at the investment country. The second way to obtain reclaims, a refund of reclaims of withholding tax, is with double tax treaty. So you will look at the international law and check the double tax treaty between the investment country and the residence country of your vehicles. And you will see if you have the opportunity for relief at source and based on domestic law, or relief or reclaims. For the relief at source, you will obtain the reduced rates before having received the payment on dividend or interest. When reclaims will happen when you already received the dividends or the interest, and you will request to the investment country, the tax authorities of the investment country, to obtain the difference between the domestic rate and the withholding tax applied on the double tax treaty. So you need to be aware of what are the treaty rate and if there is no changes during the year. The next way, the third way, I would say, to do tax reclaims is the UK's law. So investment manager, asset manager, life insurance company or corporates or institution have the opportunities to file a reclaims to obtain the refund of the full withholding tax. And they will use the EU law, but they also need to understand if there is a discrimination and if there is an opportunity for them to file the reclaims. Because when you want to file reclaim, you have several ways. Either you can go on a yearly basis, so every year you will check your dividends, your interest, and you will see if withholding tax has been applied on them, and if you have an opportunity or reclaim. Or you can take another approach, combine several years, analyze the data of the investment, the dividends received, and you can have, depending on the number of countries where you have investment, you will have to take all the investment portfolio while the dividends received and analyze the data to check if you have opportunities. So you have 2 approaches. Either you go on a yearly basis or you go on a 5 years, a combined basis, because what is also an important element is that for a country to another, the reclaim period will change. You can go from a 1 year reclaim period to 5 years, and this change from a country to another and can change from a year to another. We have seen the example, for example, for France several years ago. So you need to be aware of the changes. And having said that, maybe we can go to the challenges, because that show you that when we are talking about those topics, we have several challenges. One of the main challenges is that you have a constantly changing tax framework. We have seen for the last 12 months that the European Court of Justice or local legislation, local court, have issued several decisions, either positive decision or negative decision, both for the investment funds related to UCITS or non-UCITS funds, but we had decision. That means for asset manager, life insurance companies, that they need to follow the European Court of Justice or either the decision rendered by local jurisdiction. So you need to be always aware of what's going on, and that's a challenge for them.
Yeah, so it's not an automatic process, right?
Exactly.
So you need to do the due diligence, you need to follow
exactly.
on the specific case laws, whether or not it applies to your specific
Exactly.
case.
You need to check the comparability. Are you comparable to a local entity and can benefit from this, this opportunity of reclaims? The residence country, the analysis, are you considered as a resident entity or not? So you have a lot of criteria to take into consideration and to determine if you are of an opportunity to reclaim. And also you need to follow them. And sometimes you have already so many actions to take within the year, you're not always aware of what's going on. Either, like today, you have a webinar and you can be aware of what's going on. Otherwise, that means that you need to have people that are looking at the last decision from the European Court of Justice or the local Court of Justice, what's going on. For sure, there is tax alert, but still you need to understand them and see what's going on. So I think that's one of the main challenges that you have as actors of the financial industry, and you need to follow if you want to make sure that you increase your investment performance. And this can be really challenging for them. And also you have, checking the legislation and making sure that you can access to these opportunities, to these reclaim opportunities, but you have also to understand the process, the reclaim process that you have behind it. And for a country to another, it changes. You don't need the same documentation, so you have usually two types of documentation, legal and financial. And from a country to another, the type of legal documentation, okay, you will have similar documents, but some of them can change, or they need to be apostille, legalized, so it will change. And you have also the financial data. From a country to another, they will request, for example, custodian voucher or sub-custodian voucher. So you need to be aware of what's going on and understand the process. So that's one of the main challenges I see for the industry. One of the second challenges I see, it's the new process that the OECD want to implement with TRACE. So the treaty relief and compliance enhancement. So the objective with this process is to harmonize and to be able to have access for the industry to relief at source. And they want to harmonize, standardize the process. But that means that we shift the responsibility from the asset manager of doing relief at source, or it needs to come from themselves to do it, to the financial institution. So they will get an authorized intermediary status and will have to make sure that they collect the documentation from the funds to make sure that they can benefit from the relief at source. Because for the moment, each country can decide if they want to apply or not relief at source. For example, in some countries, I would say, I don't have one in mind, I forgot now, but you have some countries where you cannot have access to relief at source. And with this, with TRACE, the objective is to harmonize the process and making sure that people, that the investment industry have access to the relief at source. But this increased the responsibilities for the financial institution, the risk exposure, and some of them have decided to change their market offering and not offer this relief at source for finished dividends. So the market is changing, and financial institutions are not willing to take this responsibility and this burden to work, to at least offer to client the relief at source.
So it's kind of a conflict of performance on the one hand and the responsibility aspect the financial institution would need to take if it were to apply to these.
Exactly. So having said that, and talking about burden, maybe we can go to the next slide. And as I said before, one of the main things that we see when we're talking about tax reclaim is that it's complex. I know that when we have discussion with clients, they always say, okay, but you need a lot of documentation. we need to collect a lot of information, and this is worse. Is it worse to do all of this? I would say yes at some point, because you are able to increase the investment performance, and I'm sure that your client will be happy. They will be happy to see an investment performance that is increasing. But for sure, you have a process that is a burden. And the first step of the process is the cost-benefit analysis. Because when we want to go for reclaims, we need to identify if we have reclaim opportunities. And as I mentioned before, you have 3 types of legislation for reclaim opportunities. We will go to domestic legislation, double tax treaty, or EU law. And you need to combine all this information, plus, so it will be double tax treaty rates, domestic legislation rate, but also the reclaim period information. Take into consideration when you are in EU law, the legal form of the vehicle or the regulatory form of the vehicle. So you need to combine those information into a matrix, and that way you're able to identify if you have opportunities. But when you have an important volume of data, that can be complicated to perform this analysis, and sometimes it's manual. But we all know that manual treatments imply that you need to do a lot of retreatment, and it could take some time. And when we are talking about reclaims, and for example, if you do it on a yearly basis, you need to make sure that every year you are doing this cost-benefit analysis to avoid losing an opportunity to reclaims, and be able to identify those opportunities to reclaims. So I would say the first step, it's the cost-benefit analysis, and it could be a burden if you don't have the right tools to perform this analysis. And it's the reason why technology at this point is really important to have, because with technology, we can overcome those challenges and turn them into opportunities. Making sure that we can process easily the data, be able to identify all the scenario that you have, if you are UCITS, non-UCITS, depending on the residence country of the vehicle or the investment country. And you have the matrix that enable us to identify what are the opportunities. And we process them in our tool, and that help us to identify the opportunities without having a manual treatment or retreatment. Or if we have one, it's really limited.
Well, that sounds indeed very important to me, because if you see how many countries or investment countries you can have in the European Union, no standardized procedure
exactly
yet, and you all need to do it manually. So I guess that is really the next step to have it
exactly in place,
available, implemented to help you, also overcome the cost.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. So you have the cost-benefit analysis and the documentation collection that is necessary to do it. So like you say, each country has a different process, so we need to collect different information, provide them in a different way. For example, with COVID, we have been able to provide documents that are in electronic format, when before they wanted only to have papers. So the trend is changing, and we are becoming more and more digital on this aspect. For sure, there is some country like Spain, they love to have the papers, and if you need to have the document apostilled and legalized. But still, we are making some progress with other countries, and they are happy with a digital form. So technology is important, and it's one way to overcome those challenges. Technology is important, and investing in technology, it's important if you want to process the reclaims easily. Because for sure you have several steps, but with technology we can overcome the steps and making sure that we process quite easily the reclaims. Having a good understanding of the process, it's really important. I would say the process in general, but also the process in each country, that's really key if we want to be efficient on the reclaims, and making sure that we have a clear understanding and a team that has they would say that it's more personal on this type of topics.
Well, that seems to me very difficult for the fund manager herself or himself to have that overview for each each jurisdiction. So it really makes sense to onboard a third party to help with the knowledge and combine that within one dedicated and knowledgeable provider.
Exactly. we have for sure custodian banks that do tax reclaims, either double tax treaty or domestic. But when we are talking about EU reclaims, EU law reclaims, UK's law reclaims, it's necessary to have to work with a third service provider, to make sure that you have the right approach and you have the correct documentation that is collected, because they have their way with, I would say, the tax authorities and with the local lawyers when we are working with them to process the reclaims. Because when we will do double tax treaty reclaims, we will go through either the custodian bank or to the tax authorities. You have different way. But when you are talking about EU law reclaims, we need to go through, I would say, the legal way, collect the information, making sure that we have the right comparability analysis to attach to the reclaims, and working with local teams. And it's one important element of the reclaim process.
I see.
So we are talked a lot about what are the challenges, how to overcome this, but I think that one topic that will have more interest for our audience is the latest changes for tax reclaims. And like I said before, we had a lot of changes during the last 12 months. I would start with Spain, because for several years we already had refunds for UCITS funds in Spain. So you were introducing reclaims and you had the refund for UCITS claims. I know that the webinar is about UCITS, but when we are talking about tax reclaims, we need to discuss about UCITS and non-UCITS funds. So we had positive decision for UCITS funds for quite several years now. And last year, the Spanish High Court confirmed that the free movement of capital is also in French if the non-resident investment qualifies under EU non-UCITS funds. That opened the door for Luxembourg and other EU but non-UCITS funds to have access to a refund of the withholding tax. So before it was open only to UCITS funds, and you were able to benefit before payment of the dividend of the reduced rate, or by introducing, if you didn't do it, by introducing the reclaims. And now you have the opportunity for UCITS and non-UCITS funds to have access to a reduced withholding tax. And that's huge, because we were waiting this decision for several years now. I think that the first positive decision that we got for Spain was in 2016 or 17 that we got the first refund, and it was only for UCITS funds, and for non-UCITS we were always receiving a negative decision and had to the administrative court and higher when necessary. So that for Spain, but it's not the only one country that provided with positive decision during the last 12 months. We have also Portugal, that the arbitration court, issued a positive decision for a foreign investment fund, a UCITS funds, and that also has been confirmed by the European Court of Justice, saying that, okay, there is clearly a discrimination, and local funds should be treated, a foreign fund should be treated like a local fund. So there is also an opportunity on the Portuguese market to file reclaims for UCITS funds, and also I think for non-UCITS funds in the future, to obtain a refund of the withholding tax. So speaking about Spain, Portugal, we have also Finland. So it was also a decision that was expected for several years. So we had the decision in 2021. So we were receiving positive decision for contractual fund and for SICAV. We were making, the Finnish tax authorities were making the difference between non-listed and listed SICAV. When we had listed SICAV, when we had listed SICAV, we were getting a refund. But for non-listed SICAV, it was always a negative decision. And the courts, in October 21, the court finally issued a decision in favor of a Luxembourg SICAV that was claiming a withholding tax refund that was non-listed SICAV. And it was considered comparable of a local fund, so it would able to benefit for the refund of the withholding tax. So that also that is also opening the door to non-listed CCAV, to CCAV, I would say in more general way, to get a refund from the withholding tax. And this will have a huge impact because we had clients that for several years were waiting, that were introducing reclaims and introducing before the court some litigation. Sorry, I was forgetting the word. And now we are expecting some positive decision for client. So it's always a good decision for them. So there is a way to there is opportunities for the Finnish market to introduce reclaims. And after Italy also, it was expected, I think, for almost 10 years. We got the first positive decision from the Court of Pescara, so this year. The Pescara court issued 2 decisions confirming that the Lux CCAV, UCITS CCAV, is entitled to a refund of the withholding tax applied on dividends distributed by an Italian company. That's also huge because we were introducing reclaim for several years for our clients on the Italian market. We know that they were put in an entrepôt in Italy, in Pescara, but we never received decision, and we had to go again to litigation to obtain a positive decision. Well, at least to have a decision on the reclaims. And now this decision opened the door for UCIT, non-UCIT fund, but even non-EU funds to get access to a refund of withholding tax. And one important fact that it's beginning of 2021, the legislation in Italy changed, and now there is no more withholding tax on dividends. There is an exemption. So this directly and indirectly recognize it. The Italian legislator recognized that there were discrimination before. So it opened also the door for the reclaims. So we had several decisions. I'm sure that also people want to know about Germany. There is not a lot of changes about Germany. There is still some cases that are pending, but we had a positive now decision from Portugal, Spain, Finland, and Italy, and that can convince clients that they should pursue their tax reclaims and file them as soon as possible, because we're almost year end, and if you want to file reclaims, it's the moment for those countries to obtain the refund. I'm not going to say that it's going to be last year, but at least the reclaims are introduced, the rights of the fund are protected, and they can obtain a refund when the reclaim will be treated by the tax authorities.
I see. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot for this comprehensive overview. And I think in particular, the last slide and the different countries really demonstrate that the nitty-gritty details, they are decisive at the end of the day, whether you have a chance of a reclaim in country A or an exemption in country A, or whether it's different in country B. UCITS, non-UCITS, listed versus non-listed.
Exactly.
So, and I think that really demonstrates how difficult it is, at fund manager level or
to follow
and to combine all of that and to basically follow and to see the opportunities in that context. So.
And there is opportunities now. Yeah, still there were opportunities for the last 10 years, but there is more opportunities with those last decisions that we see from the European Court of Justice or the local court. So there is
and all of this basically should be combined in a best case scenario.
Exactly.
One tool at one place, and where you do it all over your investments, in particular in Europe. Okay, I think that concludes for the second part in view of the withholding tax reclaim. We have on the next slide, I think, or in the next part, when we focus on recent tax trends, in particular in the UCITS or fund world, there's also something.
Some changes.
some changes you want to contribute from a withholding tax perspective. So now we're right into the third part of our webinar today. So what are the recent trends, and what are we seeing from a tax perspective? And I would say on my part, that there are, if you will, there are the evergreens, which always pop up, and you also have kind of some newbies to the party, if you will, from a tax perspective. So let's start with the evergreen. So evergreen, I think you're familiar with that. It's FATCA, CRS, policies, reporting, register of action. I think they are the there have been some more recent changes in terms of reporting obligation. DAC 6 reporting is a bit more recent in general, the reporting obligation, but there you also need to implement your policy and have a diligent compliance process in that regard, determining in particular in fund structures where different intermediaries are involved to determine the intermediary doing the reporting, doesn't report. So in that sense, it comes a bit out of the evergreen corner, but due to recent changes in that regard, I think that is worth mentioning here as well. And then more recently, on the transfer pricing side, in particular in view of the remuneration of mancos, we also see a certain development, because from a transfer pricing perspective, or tax-wise speaking, the manco needs to needs to realize an arm's length remuneration, meaning arm's length, that it needs to be remunerated in a way a third party would have been remunerated in a comparable situation. And that discussion, in particular post-Brexit, more and more comes up also in the UCITS world, where we see that certain functions, certain activities, and certain risks are transferred from the UK
to Europe,
to Europe, and in particular back to Luxembourg, or transferred to Luxembourg. So where the Luxembourg manco now assumes more responsibilities, more tasks, assumes more risks
than before.
Obviously, then one needs to make the connection whether that means that the remuneration it receives for it is still arm's length. Because if you need to do more heavy lifting, you will also want to see a higher remuneration in that regard. So that's the transfer pricing angle in that context, particularly with post-Brexit transfers of functions to Luxembourg. And then, very hot topic right now is AML.
KYC, but it's always a hot topic, I think, now.
It's always a hot topic, and it's also to a certain extent still paper-driven. Right?
Exactly.
So it's very burdensome in that context, but recently it also becomes a topic from a tax perspective, because and that's, I think, that's a bit new. It
was not like this before,
as you say, but AML, CFT requirements in view of the fight of money laundering, of tax crimes where we have aggregated tax fraud or tax evasions, have now been picked up in CSSF circular letters, and basically who is responsible
to collect
the person's address. You have in particular, or in general, all professionals who are subject to the AML CFT supervision of the CSSF. They are responsible for that, and they need to determine, and as the case may be, also in certain circumstances report to the FIU and the CSSF that they have identified, or that they have reasonable grounds to think that they have identified an aggregated tax fraud case or a tax evasion case. And in that context, the CSSF circulars, they show 9 indicators specific to collective investment activities, just to name a few and to give you a flavor, because these topics are so big
Yeah.
in general.
If we go deep
we
in
could
one.
have hour-long dedicated sessions on
To
that.
discuss.
So complex investment structuring, tax base
Mhm.
erosion techniques, investment transactions is one of these indicators. Efficient portfolio management techniques. I'm thinking about securities lending transactions.
that we could have sometimes.
Yeah, COMEX, compose transactions.
Subscription tax.
Subscription tax avoidance. So what goes a bit in what we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Do we really qualify for the exemption or for the reduction? Investor tax reporting schemes where investors are trying to hide their reporting obligation. So these are some of the indicators, and they may sound very abstract now, but what you can do, or what you really need to do, you need to update your compliance processes, and you need to educate yourself as well,
And
and
your
to train
team.
for certain tax risk and
Yeah.
your employees, and that is also certainly where we're currently helping a lot of clients, and where also in the future I think there's more to
there
do.
is a need on these topics.
Correct. And as already indicated, there's also something on withholding taxes.
Yeah, the EU consultation that I think it's from last year, it started last year, on withholding tax relief factors. So the discussion about how we should harmonize the withholding tax relief, how we should process. So still, it's a discussion to see how we can change it, harmonize it, standardize it. I would say the same direction that we have for the OECD. So there is discussion on the table now at the EU level on, a consultation now about withholding tax and what we can do for the future. So this is to follow, it's a trend to follow for the future, because this will have a huge impact on tax reclaims. And on funds, UCITS, if they want to benefit from this. But let's see how it's going to work and how we're going to manage this in the future. It will be for our next webinar, if we have some feedback on this, more information about this.
Indeed. That was our train ride through the topics we had prepared for you today, and we also promised that we will address a couple of questions, but also follow up for these questions we cannot address, because we have 2.5 minutes left. So maybe I start with the question list, because I see that the first question is addressed in the subscription tax field. So it is: do I need to hand in the annual report with the tax authorities in Luxembourg as well when applying to in context of the reduced subscription tax rate? And the question would be, well, actually no, the annual report, you're not legally required to hand in that report. The only thing which is required is that certified statement I mentioned earlier. That needs to be handed in the format we discussed with the first subscription tax return following the issuance of the annual report in that context. But what I would say is obviously advisable to keep the annual report at the premises of the ManCo, and to have it readily available upon request of the tax authorities, or in case of an audit. So that should indeed be a prudent approach in that regard.
Okay. So for the 1.5 minutes that we have, maybe let's have a question about tax reclaims. What information do you need to identify the opportunities? So if we want to identify opportunities for tax reclaim, we just need to collect a set of data, so the raw data for, I guess, the last 5 years if you haven't done tax reclaims. So collect the financial raw data, so dividends payments, the ISIN, when it has been date of payment, this type of information. But custodian banks are used to provide this type of information to Big Fours or other companies, other type of companies. We will analyze the data, making sure that we have everything, process the data in our tool, and identify the opportunities that you have for tax reclaims. And from the moment we have identified opportunities, we can discuss and see on which market you can go, where you have more chance to get a refund or not. And this is something that we can do quite easily, I would say, because we have a solution now. We implemented a solution, and we just need your data to do it.
Okay. Well, being mindful of the time,
Yeah.
I think that's it from our side today. We appreciate very much having you on the webinar today, and feel free to get in touch for any questions you may have. We're on standby to help you answer them. Okay, then.
Thank you.
Goodbye from our side.
Thank you for joining. Bye.